If someone told you that a family could shape a nation, not through power alone, but through the walls of the homes they lived in, why? You might not believe it. But with the Kennedys, it's true. Because behind every headline, behind every historic moment, there was always a doorway, a hallway, a quiet room where a human heart was breaking, hoping, dreaming, or trying desperately to hold itself together. The name Kennedy often feels to be wrapped in politics, tragedy, glamour. Yet the more you look, the more you see something surprisingly familiar. A family trying to stay close, trying to protect each other, trying to build a life that felt safe and warm, even when the world outside was anything but. And their houses, those white porches, sunlit bedrooms, worn wooden floors absorbed every emotion. They heard children laugh until they collapsed breathless on summer lawns. They felt footsteps pacing through long nights of fear. They held whispered prayers, private arguments, fragile hopes. These weren't just mansions. They were witnesses to everything the world never saw. Today, we step inside and not to admire architecture, but to understand the people who lived within those walls. If you want to understand the Kennedys, not the legends, not the headlines, but the people, you must start in Hyannisport. Not in Washington, not in Boston, not in Palm Beach, but here, on a windy corner of Cape Cod, where the Atlantic crashes against the rocks and the salt air carries both laughter and memory. Before it became the Kennedy compound, before it became a symbol of American royalty, Hyannisport was simply a place where a father looked at a quiet white cottage and imagined a future bigger than the ocean before him. It was 1928 when Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. first stepped onto the porch of that house. The boards creaked under his feet, the paint was worn, and the sea breeze pushed gently against the windows. Most people would have called it charming. Joseph saw something else. He saw a foundation not for a house, but for a dynasty. He bought it instantly, not for prestige, but for love. For the kind of love only a parent understands. The hope that your children might become everything you'd never be, and maybe even more. Roe S.E. Kennedy filled the home with structure, warmth, and a kind of soft discipline. Her mornings began early, rosary in hand, sunlight filtering through the curtains, the smell of coffee drifting far on the kitchen, and soon enough, the hallway erupted with life. 9 children running, yelling, searching for shoes, chasing each other, arguing about who got the biggest pancake. The Kennedy house was never quiet, and that noise, that chaos, that warmth, it was their greatest inheritance. Summer was their season. The children would burst out the front door barefoot, racing down the arm toward the cold Atlantic water. Jonathan, curious, already carrying the aches that would follow him through life, tried to hide his pain with humor. Robert, intense, determined, pushed himself harder than anyone. Ted, the youngest, stumbled behind them, fighting to keep up, and yet, when they reached the shoreline, they were equals, swallowed by the same waves, shaped by the same wind. Football lines on the grass became a Kennedy ritual. It wasn't just play, it was training. Here, among scraped knees and bruised elbows, they learned how to win with grace, lose with dignity, tie, and compete fiercely without losing each other. Joseph watched them closely, not because he wanted champions, but because he wanted resilience. Life isn't gentle, he would say, so don't ask it to be. Inside the house, evenings were their own kind of battlefield. Dinner at Hyannisport was not relaxing, it was exhilarating. Rose sat at the head of the table, Joseph at the other end. The children, still flushed from the day, took their places as if preparing for a debate they didn't know they joined. Joseph fired questions at them like sparks from a fire. What do you think about this? Why do you believe that? Defend your answer. No one was too young to speak. No one was excused from thinking. At that table, their minds were sharpened long before their names appeared on ballots. As the children grew, so did the house, then the houses. John bought the property next door. Robert bought another. Soon 3 homes stood side by side, connected by green lawns, narrow paths, and an ocean view so wide it felt almost unreal. Together, these homes formed the Kennedy compound, a place where cousins ran freely between porches, where dinner tables stretched endlessly, where every door seemed to lead to another moment waiting to become a memory. Then came 1960, and everything changed. The compound transformed from a family playground into the heart of a presidential campaign. Reporters gathered at the gates, helicopters beat the air overhead. Advisors rushed between houses carrying folders, maps, schedules. Inside, meetings stretched long into the night. The same rooms that once echoed with childish laughter now held murmured strategy, whispered worries, and the weight of a nation's expectations. Yet something beautiful remained untucked. Step outside during those long nights, and you might still see Carolyn running through the yard, hair flying behind her, chasing a dog that had no intention of stopping. Even as history unfolded, childhood persisted because Hyannisport never let them forget who they were beneath the headlines. When John F. Kennedy was elected president, the media named Hyannisport the Sum. A White House, dignitaries walked across the same grass that once stained the knees of Kennedy children. Journalists photographed the family playing football, capturing scenes from a modern epic, and for a moment, it seemed as if the compound had fulfilled its purpose, turning a hopeful family into America's symbol of youth, charm, and possibility. But every place that holds joy into a lie holds grief. When John was assassinated in 1963, Hyannisport became a sanctuary of sorrow. Family arrived with trembling hands and broken voices. Silence settled over the compound in a way it never had before. Even the ocean sounded different, darker, heavier. The porch where children once sat drying off their feet became the place where siblings held each other and tried to make sense of an unthinkable loss. Still, the house did what great houses do. It held them. It didn't erase the pain, but it absorbed it, softened it, gave them a place to earn together. Robert and Ted kept the traditions alive, the football games, the dinners, the debates, because losing a brother felt unbearable, but losing the family they'd built together would have been even worse. In 2012, the main house was donated to the Edward M. Kennedy Institute, turning a private home into a public legacy. Today it stands proudly, the paint a little faded, the shutters weathered by salt and wind, but the spirit inside as strong as ever. Hyannisport was never just a house. It was the beating heart of a family that shaped a nation. And if you stand there long enough, with the W aimed on your face and the ocean in your ears, you can almost hear them again, the footsteps, the laughter, the hope. The beginning of everything. When John F. Kennedy took the oath of office in 1961, the world witnessed a young president standing beneath winter sunlight, his breath visible in the cold air, his voice steady, carrying a nation into a new era. But what most people didn't see, what they couldn't see, was the weight he carried as he walked back into the building that would become both his workplace and his family home. The White House, a place that symbolizes power to the world, yet felt strangely hollow when the Kennedys first arrived. The rooms were mismatched, cluttered, stripped of the history they once held. Portraits were missing. Furniture from earlier presidents had been sold or lost. The soul of the house had faded, buried beneath rushed renovations and changing tastes. And then Jacqueline Kennedy stepped inside. At just 31 years old, she looked at the White House not as a backdrop for politics, but as a living museum, a place that should honor every life, every decision, every moment that had unfolded beneath its chandeliers. She believed that history wasn't just something you studied. History was something you felt. So she began one of the most ambitious restorations the building had ever seen. Day after day, she combed through age-old archives, photographs, paintings, journals. Her soft voice carried questions that no one had asked in decades. What once stood in this room? Where did that original desk go? What did the blue room look like in Monroe's time? With every answer she uncovered, she restored not only furniture and fabrics, but dignity. She traveled the country searching for missing artifacts. She convinced museums, private collectors, even families of former presidents to return items that rightfully belonged to the people. Bit by bit, she brought the White House back to life, elegant, authentic, filled with stories waiting quietly. Along its walls, some critics mocked the project. Decorating, they called it. Trivial, but Jacqueline never wavered. She knew that a nation's home would reflect its spirit and its memory. And in the quiet moments, away from the cameras, John understood too. He admired her determination. He saw the care she poured into every detail. And he felt grateful, because as he faced the cold war, civil rights struggles, and the terrifying threat of nuclear conflict, she was giving him something priceless, a home that felt steady, grounded, whole. In 1962, she did something that had never been done before. She opened the White House to the world. Millions of Americans tuned in to watch her televised tour. Her voice was gentle, but confident as she guided viewers from room to room, revealing not just furniture, but meaning. People weren't just looking at antiques, they were looking at their own heritage. For the first time, the White House felt accessible, human, alive, and America fell in love with her all over again. Behind the scenes, the White House became more than a political headquarters. It transformed into a cultural sanctuary. Writers, musicians, poets, and scholars walked its halls. Classical music filled the rooms during evening gatherings. Diplomats discussed foreign policy beside priceless art. Newly Rita, led to its rightful place. Under John and Jackie, the White House wasn't just leading the country, it was inspiring it. But even the most beautiful homes cannot fund the hardest moments. During late nights in the Oval Office, John wrestled with decisions few men in history have faced. Maps of Cuba spread across his desk. Phone calls carried tension so sharp it fell to like the air itself might break. Advisors debated with urgent voices, and through the window, he could sometimes see the faint glow of light from his children's room, reminding him that even as he held the world's fears in his hands, he was still a father trying to come home safely. Some nights, he would quietly leave the Oval Office and walk toward the residence, loosening his tie, taking a breath. Jackie might still be awake, reading or writing notes for her next preservation project. They would speak softly about the day, about the children, about the world, and for a moment, the White House became what every home longs to be, a refuge, but nothing could prepare it for the moment everything changed. November 22, 1963. The news spread like fire. Suddenly, the White House so full of light, music, culture became a place of mourning. Staff members walked its halls in silence. Advisors cried behind closed doors, and Jacqueline Kennedy, dressed in black, passed through the restored rooms she had fought so hard to protect, knowing she would be leaving without the man she had once entered beside. The chandeliers she polished for state dinners now reflected grief. The rooms she filled with history now held pain that no historian could ever put into words. When Jackie left the White House, she left behind more than personal memories. She left behind a promise. Her restoration formed the foundation for the White House Historical Association, ensuring that every president after John would walk through rooms that honored the past instead of erasing it. And even today, decades later, much of what you see inside the White House, the elegance, the authenticity, the sense of living history, is because a young first Odd believed a nation deserved a home worthy of its story. The Kennedys didn't just live in the White House, they transformed it. They filled it with humanity, with beauty, with purpose, and even in the quietest corners, you can still feel echoes of them, of a family who brought grace to power, and who taught a country that leadership is not only about decisions, but about soul. If Hyannisport was the Kennedy family's heartbeat and the White House was their stage, then Palm Beach was something far more intimate, a place where the family could exhale, a place where the sun softened he weight on their shoulders, where the waves seemed to wash away whatever burdens they carried from Washington. The winter White House was not a retreat from responsibility. It was a reminder that even the most powerful among us need warmth, rest, and the comfort of familiar walls. The story of this home began long before John F. Kennedy ever stepped inside it. In 1933, Joseph P. Kennedy, Sr. purchased the property for an extraordinary sum, a bold declaration during an era when most Americans struggled to make ends meet. But Joseph didn't buy homes to impress the world, he bought them to build a world for his family, a world where dreams had room to grow, a world where laughter had space to echo. The Palm Beach mansion was designed by Addison Misner, the architect who gave Florida its Mediterranean soul. Walking through the house felt like drifting through a sunlit dream, arched doorways framing the blue sky, terracotta tiles warming under bare feet, white stucco walls glowy, like they were lit from within. The air smelled of ocean salt and jasmine. The courtyards were shaded and quiet, perfect for whispered conversations or afternoon reading. The backyard stretched until it simply became beach, no fence, no border, just a gentle surrender into the Atlantic. Palm trees swayed like slow dancers. The pool shimmered beneath the sun. Tennis courts waited for children. Endless reserves of energy. It was a paradise built not for glamour, but for living. Before he was president, before he was the symbol of a new generation, John F. Kennedy spent slow winters here, recovering from his chronic back pain. Some days, he moved gingerly. Other days, the pain was too much to hide. And yet, it was in this peaceful corner of the world Hattie wrote large portions of Profiles in Courage, the book that would earn him a Pulitzer Prize. Imagine him there, sunlight on the pages, waves rhythmically hitting the shore, his mind turning political questions into stories of bravery. This house was his sanctuary long before it became his office. When John became president, Palm Beach transformed into the winter White House, and the world followed. Motorcades rolled past palm trees. Helicopters cut through the warm air. Photographers waited at the gates. But the Kennedys had a way of making history look human. Even as global tensions soared, even as crises threatened, the Palm Beach home seemed to hold on to a kind of fragile peace. John would often step out onto the balcony overlooking the Atlantic, a notebook in hand. There, he drafted parts of his inaugural address, the words that would inspire a generation. Ask not what your country can do for you. Those lines were shaped not in a cold Washington office, but in the embrace of ocean wind and Florida sunlight. It was also here, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, that he paced the balcony in quiet contemplation. The house suddenly felt closer to Cuba, its warm breeze carrying a shadow of fear. Imagine him standing there, young, exhausted, thousands of lives depending on each decision he made. In that moment, the winter White House wasn't a luxury. It was a refuge, a place where he could gather the strength to face a world trembling on the brink. Inside, the house was bright and full of life. The children loved Palm Beach. Carolyn's laughter traveled through the hallways. John Jr. toddled through courtyards, holding on to furniture as he learned balance in every sense of the word. Jackie brought elegance wherever she went. Sun hats, soft dresses, the unmistakable grace that made every room feel complete. Here, she wasn't the first lady. She was simply a mother, a wife, a woman trying to create moments of normalcy in a life that rarely allowed it. The renovations overseen by architect Morris Facio kept the home beautiful without diminishing its soul. Rooms were updated, but their warmth remained. Furniture was curated, not to impress guests, but to cradle memories. The Kennedys wanted a home that felt alive, not a museum of perfection. But like all Kennedy homes, Palm Beach eventually carried sorrow, too. After the assassination in 1963, the house once filled with sunlight and laughter held a quieter kind of grief. The ocean kept going, the palm trees kept swaying. But something in the air changed. Ski returned years later for private moments of reflection. Family gathered there, remembering a man whose voice still seemed to echo faintly across the waves. Time moved on, but the house endured. In 2021, renovations approved by the Palm Beach Landmarks Preservation Commission ensured that the home's legacy would be preserved, not because it belonged to a president, but because it belonged to a story, one of love, ambition, loss, and the resilience of a family whose dreams shaped a nation. Today, the winter White House still stands under the Florida sun, its arches casting soft shadows, its walls warm with history. It is a place where decisions once shifted the world, where a young president found clarity, where a family sought rest, and where echoes of rage still linger in the breeze. Palm Beach wasn't just where the Kennedys escaped. It was where they remembered who they were. After Dallas, after the funeral watched by millions, after the stillness that settled over a grieving nation, Jacqueline Kennedy faced a question no history book can fully capture. Where does a person go when the whole world has watched her lose everything? Her answer was quiet. She went to New York. It was 1964 when she moved into a 15th-floor penthouse at 1040 Fifth Avenue, a building of limestone, elegance, and old Manhattan dignity. To the outside world, it was just another luxury residence along Central Park, but for Jackie, still holding the weight of grief inside her chest, it was not an address, it was a lifeline. From the moment she walked in, the apartment seemed to understand her. Sunlight poured across herringbone wood floors. Tall ceilings created a hush that felt protective. The windows looked out over Central Park, where children played without reporters tracking their steps. Inside these rooms, for the first time in years, Jackie could breathe. The world had seen her in unimaginable pain. Here, she didn't have to be strong for anyone. The apartment became a sanctuary stitched together from memory and resilience. Jackie filled it with books, hundreds of them stacked on shelves, tables, even on the floor beside her reading chair. She collected art not for prestige, but for meaning. Delicate watercolors, framed prints from Paris, photographs that whispered stories of places she loved. There were reminders of the White House years, but not in a way that haunted. She displayed them like gentle acknowledgments of a life that once was. Every room held something deeply personal. Chair she adored from Georgetown, a portrait of Carolyn and John Jr. smiling without facade. A weathered desk where she scribbled notes late into the night. The world often sees monuments when it thinks of the Kennedys, memorials, libraries, documentaries. But here, inside this Fifth Avenue apartment, was something far more human. A woman learning to stand again. The city embraced her. New Yorkers did what New Yorkers do. Best they gave her space. They let her walk down the street in peace. They nodded politely, but didn't intrude. They treated her not as a tragic icon, but as a neighbor with groceries in her hands and children to raise. Those children, Carolyn and young John Jr., transformed the apartment into a home. Laughter returned slowly, then fully. A played on the floor, drew pictures at the kitchen table, pressed their hands against the glass to watch the city lights flicker on each night. Jackie encouraged their curiosity. She wanted them to feel the world, not fear it. She knew that to heal them, she needed to heal a little herself. In this home, she rebuilt not just her life, but her identity. She became an editor, a role few people expected, but one that suited her perfectly. At Viking Press and later at Doubleday, she shaped manuscripts, guided authors, nurtured stories. Colleagues described her as fiercely intelligent, quiet, confident, endlessly considerate. She read with the same gentle intensity she once brought to the White House restoration. This time, instead of preserving a nation's history, she was helping others share theirs. But the apartment held a deeper purpose too. It reignited her passion for preservation and cultural heritage. When New York's Grand Central Terminal faced demolition, Jackie stepped forward. She stood on train platforms, spoke at rallies, wrote letters, met with officials. Her voice, soft but unshakable, became a force. She reminded the city that beauty matters, history matters, and once a landmark is gone, it's gone forever. Her fight saved Grand Central. And in those moments, the Fifth Avenue apartment wasn't just a home, it was headquarters to a quiet revolution in preservation. Years passed, seasons changed outside her windows, lush green summers in the park, golden autumns, silent winters where snow muted the city's roar. Jackie aged gracefully in those rooms. Friends visited, authors sought her advice. Her children grew tall and independent. She faced challenges like anyone else: illness, loneliness, the ghosts of memory that lingered no matter how many years passed. But she carried herself with a grace that seemed almost unreal, light, steady, timeless. When she married Aristotle Onassis in 1968, her name changed, but her heart stayed tied to this apartment. When he passed away, she returned here, once again finding safety within its walls. For 30 years, 3 decades of her life, this Fifth Avenue penthouse held her joys, her fears, her reinventions, her quiet triumphs. It was the place where she found peace after the unimaginable, where she tucked her children into bed, where she edited books late into the night, where she watched the city she helped protect continue to thrive around her. When Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis passed away in 1994, the apartment didn't just lose its resident, it lost its light. New Yorkers gathered outside, leaving flowers along the sidewalk, whispering thank yous to a woman who had given them beauty, dignity, and the fierce belief that places like people deserve to be saved. In the years since, the apartment has been home to billionaires, business leaders, and collectors. But none have ever matched the quiet power Jackie brought to its rooms. Today, passers-by still look up, almost unconsciously, at the 15th floor. They imagine her standing by the window at dusk, the last ray of sunlight touching her face, the park glowing below. And even though she's gone, the feeling remains soft, bittersweet, unforgettable. Because 1040 Fifth Avenue wasn't just where Jacqueline Kennedy lived. It was where she healed. Not all Kennedy stories were written by the sea or beneath chandeliers. Some were written in the warm, lived-in rooms of a brick mansion, tucked behind tall trees in the quiet town of McLean, Virginia. Hickory Hill didn't dazzle like Palm Beach, and it didn't carry the mythic weight of Hyannisport, but it held something just as powerful, the mind and moral compass of the Kennedy fam. Illy, you feel it the moment you imagine stepping inside. The house is grand, yes, Georgian columns, long staircases, wide windows, but nothing about it feels untouchable. The floors carry scratches, made by running children. Sofas are softened by years of conversations. The air smells faintly of books, old wood, and the sweetness of family life. If Hyannisport was where the Kennedys played, Hickory Hill was where they thought, argued, dreamed, learned, questioned, and sometimes broke. Robert F. Kennedy and his wife, Ethel, bought the home in 1955. They arrived with 2 children. They would eventually raise 11. That alone should tell you what the house sounded like. Doors slamming, dogs barking, screen doors fluttering in the wind, laughter bursting from every corner, piano keys being pounded, not played, and footsteps thundering down the stairs like rolling storms. Chaos, yes, but joyful chaos. RFK was known publicly for his intensity, his moral clarity, his fight for justice, but at home he was simply Daddy. A man who slipped off his shoes the moment he stepped through the door. A man who knelt to tie a child's sneaker while carrying He weight of a nation's conscience on his back, a man who swam with his kids in the afternoon and debated policy with historians that same night. Hickory Hill allowed him to be all of these versions of himself without contradiction. And then there were the seminars. Most people today don't realize how extraordinary they were. Hickory Hill became the unofficial intellectual engine of the 1960s. These were not formal events but living, breathing conversations, gatherings where ideas collided like sparks. Writers, journalists, poets, astronauts, civil rights leaders, professors, senators, Hey, all crowded into the living room. Some stood, some sat cross-legged on the floor, some perched on the staircase. The room hummed with possibility. RFK would walk slowly, listening more than speaking. He'd stop in mid-stride, tilt his head, and ask a question that felt simple but cut straight to the core. But what does that mean for people who have nothing? Is it right? If this were your child, what would you choose? There was no stage, no microphones, just minds meeting minds, and always the children watching from the hallway, absorbing everything. Hickory Hill was a house where curiosity lived openly and courage was taught indirectly. This was where RFK learned how to turn heartbreak into action, where he studied the pain of others until it became his own, where he shaped the convictions he would carry to the Senate and, ultimately, to the campaign trail that would end too soon. But before the tragedy, there was joy, so much joy. Summers filled with backyard games, horseback rides, midnight swims, and picnics that stretched until the fireflies came out. The Kennedys believed fiercely in family rituals, the simple ones that anchor you to the earth. Ethel made sure no visitor felt like a stranger. If you walked through the front door, you were handed a plate, a chair, a story, and the sense that you belonged. Then came 1968. The gunshots in Los Angeles changed the world, and when the news reached Hickory Hill, a veil of silence fell over the house that had once overflowed with sound. The windows glowed softly into the night as neighbors, friends, and loved ones gathered in quiet disbelief. Children clung to each other. Adults tried to find words where none existed. Ethel stayed. For decades, she kept the ooze alive. She let it breathe again slowly, painfully, beautifully. Birthdays, reunions, Sunday dinners, grandchildren shrieking with delight in the halls. The house healed in the only way homes know how, by holding every memory, good and bad, without judgment. Hickory Hill became both monument and refuge. It remembered RFK not as a fallen leader, but as a father who sat cross-legged on the carpet with toys scattered around him, as a husband who laughed loudest at his own jokes, as a man who believed that compassion was not weakness, but strength. In 2009, when the property was sold to tech entrepreneur Alan Dabier, it was carefully restored, preserved with reverence for the life that had unfolded inside its walls. Today, Hickory Hill still stands as one of Virginia's most iconic estates, not because of its architecture, but because of the ideas that were born there and the love that survived there. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear it still, the laughter, the debates, the footsteps of children running toward a future their parents fought to make better. Hickory Hill wasn't just a home. It was the Kennedy conscience, a house where dreams grew loud and where hearts learned how to stay soft. When you step back and look at all the Kennedy homes together, Hyannisport, the White House, Palm Beach, Fifth Avenue, Hickory Hill, you begin to realize something powerful. None of these places were built to show wealth. They were built to hold life. And not just ordinary life, but a life lived loudly, bravely, imperfectly, beautifully, with all the joy and all the heartbreak that comes with caring deeply about family, country, and the future. The Kennedys did not choose simple lives. They did not choose quiet roads. Their homes, scattered across the American landscape, became anchors for a family constantly pulled between public duty and private longing. Every house tells a different part of the same story, a story about ambition, loss, hope, and the universal truth that even those who seem larger than life are still painfully, wonderfully human. Hyannisport was their heart the plots, where children learned not just how to sail or throw a football, but how to stand tall after falling. It was the origin point of laughter so loud it travelled across the waves, of dreams so big they needed the whole Atlantic to hold them, and it was the place they ran back to when everything around them began to break. At Hyannisport, history didn't feel intimidating. It felt like family sitting around a table, teaching you to speak your mind and soften your heart at the same time. The White House was their stage, the place where John and Jackie transformed American politics into something graceful, thoughtful, almost poetic. They brought culture back into leadership, art back into diplomacy, meaning back into public service. It wasn't perfection, but it was possibility. Jackie believed the White House should not simply reflect the power of a presidency, but the spirit of a people. She restored its memory so Americans could remember themselves, and in the halls where John once walked, carrying the weight of the world on his young shoulders. You can still feel traces of that courage today. Palm Beach was their escape, the warm breath of Florida reminded them that the world is not only about crises and decisions. It was a place where sunlight hit the walls just right, where the wind whispered gently instead of urgently. It was the room where part of "Ask Not What Your Country Can Do For You" was written, proof that some of the most important ideas are born not in conference rooms, but in quiet moments, when a man lets himself breathe long enough to think clearly. Even during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the world trembled on the edge, Palm Beach gave John a moment's clarity, a pause in the storm that helped him steer the country away from disaster. Fifth Avenue was the place where Jackie learned to live again, not as a first lady, not as an icon, but as a woman rebuilding herself piece by piece. It was where she read manuscripts late into the night, guided young authors, and fought to save New York's architectural soul. It was where she whispered goodnight to her children in rooms that finally gave them privacy. It was where she proved that healing is not about forgetting, but about learning to live with what you carry. Her apartment didn't just hold her grief, it held her rebirth. And then Hickory Hill, the mind of the family, the home where ideas sparked like flint and grew into speeches, laws, movements, where RFK turned heartbreak into purpose, pain into empathy, conviction into action. It was a home that believed in big questions, late-night conversations, and the kind of discussions that changed the course of history. When Robert died, Hickory Hill didn't fall silent forever. It kept breathing through the children who ran its halls, the guests who shared its tables, the legacy that refused to dim. Each home was a chapter. Together, they were a story. But what was the story really about? If you peel away politics, wealth, fame, tragedy, what remains is something astonishingly simple. The Kennedys were a family trying to love one another in a world that ended. They belonged to everyone. Their homes were the few places where they didn't need to be symbols, where they could laugh too loudly, cry without cameras, argue about nonsense, celebrate tiny victories, cling to each other during unbearable losses. These walls, weathered, sunlit, scarred by time, held the rawest parts of their humanity. And maybe that's why the world still cares. Not because they were perfect, but because they were real. Because behind the photographs and speeches were children learning to walk, parents learning to hope, siblings learning to forgive. Because the places lived remind us that even extraordinary lives are built on ordinary moments, sketching conversations, late-night worries, shared meals, good-night hugs, silent prayers. The Kennedy homes and today not as shrines to power, but as monuments, truths. Fifth Avenue endures because healing is its own form of legacy. Hickory Hill endures because ideas once spoken never truly die. And through it all, a quieter truth emerges: homes matter. not because of size or style, but because of the moments they hold, the people they shape, the love they protect, the pain they witness, the hope they shelter. The Kennedy mansions remind us that our own lives, no matter how ordinary they may seem, are shaped by the places we return to when the world becomes too loud. A small kitchen where your parents drank morning coffee, a bedroom where you hung posters of who you wanted to be, a porch where someone waited for you to come home, a hallway where you whispered secrets to a sibling, a door where you once hesitated to walk through because you didn't know what waited on the other side. These places are our legacies too, even if history never writes their names. In the end, T.H.E. Kennedy's story is not about politics or privilege. It is about humanity. About trying, failing, loving, losing. Beginning again, and holding on to the idea that no matter how dark the world feels, there is always a reason to hope, because somewhere on a quiet coast in Massachusetts, a house still stands against the wind. In Washington, chandeliers still shine over rooms filled with laughter. In Palm Beach, waves still hit the sand where a young president once stood looking toward the future. On Fifth Avenue, lights still glow above a city Jackie helped save, and in Virginia, a brick mansion still hums with the echoes of arguments that once tried to make America better. These houses remember, and through them, so do we. The Kennedy legacy isn't built of stone, or wood or marble. It is built of courage, kindness, conversation, and dreams carried forward generation after generation by those brave enough to believe life can be more. And that is a legacy that never dies.